Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's Intellectual Forum event here with ThinkLab and Huckleberry. We are really delighted to welcome you to talk this evening to Jessica and Erin, who are both here with us, to talk about children and sleep, looking at a wonderful wide amount of data and interesting topics that they will run through with us later on. I'm Sarah Steele. I'm the Deputy Director of the Intellectual Forum and based in Cambridge Public Health. Just to give you a bit of background, because some of you may never have heard of the Intellectual Forum before, the actual forum is a centre here in Cambridge where we just like to get people thinking. Our whole basis is to explore issues that often fall outside of academic departments and that have big, hard-hitting influence on our lives. We've had stellar speakers before. We've had Sir Datuk Jimmy Chu, the shoe designer. We've had the former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark. Today we've had a wonderful event for International Women's Day that's had some wonderful speakers from around the world, including Director of NASA's Deep Space X-ray Observatory, Belinda Wilkes. We've had all these wonderful transformational people come and talk to us, and we're really pleased today to be able to welcome two great women with us on this International Women's Day to talk about what they know. We're so excited to have you with us tonight, Jess and Erin, and also we have to extend our thanks to Tyler and the university's ThinkLab who've made this possible. I'll hand over to Tyler to briefly introduce what the ThinkLab does, and then we'll come back and we'll have that chat with Huckleberry.
Thanks, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Good evening or good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. Yeah, it's nice to see everybody. I wanted to briefly introduce that the Cambridge University ThinkLab, we work closely with the Intellectual Forum. We're sort of, the best way to describe it is a startup within the university. So we take research, academic research, and apply it to impact in everyday lives. We cover everything from neurodiversity, digital well-being, climate change, and fake news. So we have a number of events in the pipeline. So you can follow us on Twitter or other social media channels if you want to hear more. But I hope you'll stick around for a few of these events because they should be very good ones. And that's all I have to say. I'll turn it over to Sarah now.
So just to pick up on what Tyler just mentioned, we're running a whole week of events on sleep this week. And we are really pleased, of course, to be discussing children's sleep tonight. But across the next few days, we're going to be welcoming a range of different people. So tomorrow night, we have Dr. Michael Brandner, who is talking to us about adult sleep and what we know about adult sleep and technology. He's worked with, he's been scientific advisor to companies like Fitbit. He also has worked with Athleta and other companies like that. So he's got some really interesting insight there. Then later on this week on Thursday, we're talking to Sleep Cycle, who have an adult sleep tracking app. And then on Friday, we're going to be with RAND Europe, looking specifically at the economic costs of poor sleep. So there's a whole week of events this week. But today, of course, as we've said, we're talking to Jessica Toh, who is the CEO and co-founder of Huckleberry, the popular baby tracking and sleep improvement app. She, of course, holds an MBA from the University of Cambridge and a triple major in electrical engineering, computer science, mathematics, and statistics from the University of California, Berkeley. We also have Erin with us, who is Huckleberry's scientific advisor, sleep scientist, and the Baby Sleep Science co-founder. She leads a sleep research lab and has published numerous peer-reviewed articles. She's previously been an instructor in medicine in the Division of Sleep Medicine at Harvard Medical School, and we're really just delighted to have them with us today. They're going to turn on their cameras now. They're going to give us a wonderful presentation, and then we'll open the floor to questions from you. Just so that everybody is aware, with Jess and Erin turning on their cameras right now, you should see down the bottom that there is a Q&A function. You're welcome to use that during their talk and after. We, of course, won't get all the questions out, but I know these two wonderful women are eager to answer those questions as soon as they've finished their presentation. So over to you both, and thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sarah. I'm now going to share my screen. So we have some slides to get that we can show. All right, I'm going to put it in present mode. Here we go. Okay, so we are in for a special treat today. We know that around children's sleep, there's a lot floating around. One person will say something you should do, another person will say the exact opposite thing. So what is what? We're here to lay down the facts, lay down the myths. And as it happens most of the time when there is a myth, it's because there is an ounce of truth in it. So we'll say when it depends. Fortunately, Sarah already introduced us, which is great because I think it's a lot easier for us to talk about children's sleep than it is to talk about ourselves. So we can skip through this slide. All right. Now, for each of these facts or myths, each of these statements, I'd like you to pause for a moment before we answer them and think about for yourself, do you think this is a fact or a myth? So we'll have a little bit of active listening and you can decide for yourself, and then we'll do the reveal. Okay, so the first one, a popular book about baby sleep says, sleep in motion is lighter. Sleep in motion doesn't count. All right, so what do you think? Okay. Erin, what do you say?
So this is a myth. It's a really funny thing, but we're learning more and more about sleep. Really every day a new report comes out and that tells us something, that is game changing when it comes to sleep. And a couple of years ago, there was a study where adults were put in a rocking bed that is very much like just what a baby would be in. And what they found was that actually adults sleeping in that motion environment had stronger slow wave sleep. And so slow waves are basically when your neurons in the brain are firing at the same time. And they postulate that motion actually entrained those slow waves. And so we think that we don't have a study in babies yet to tell us that the same thing is happening there, but we don't think that motion in itself is a problem. And certainly if you measured a sleeping baby who was being walked in a stroller, you would see that they were in fact asleep. However, when you're taking your child for a walk, for example, in a stroller or a carrier, in a noisy, bright environment, it's the rest of the sleep environment that can be problematic. So, for example, when a noisy motorcycle drives by, even if your child doesn't wake up, you're going to find that your child will have lighter sleep and maybe poorer quality sleep. So while we wouldn't necessarily say that taking your child for a walk here and there is a problem, you do want to think about the big picture. You want to think about the other factors that could influence your child's sleep quality and determine whether it makes sense to allow your child to sleep in an environment that's sort of not a nursery.
Great. Yeah. So sometimes we get families who their child is really resisting that last nap, but it's too early for a bedtime. What do you do? So, motion induced sleep, a little quick nap on the go is actually okay to get that little cat nap in to make it to bedtime. So don't feel guilty about it. It's not something that you necessarily want to do all the time, but it's okay to do. All right. Next one. Okay, think about what you've heard and whether this is true or not. Naps at night are controlled by different parts of the brain. All right. So Erin, what do you think?
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily describe this as a myth, but it is incorrect. And I think that it just comes from a misunderstanding of sleep physiology and biology. So there are two sleep drives. So one is the homeostatic sleep pressure drive. Sometimes we just call this sleep pressure. The other is the circadian rhythm. And the way that these two sleep drives work, it allows for a consolidated bout of nighttime sleep. So both sleep drives, in fact, are working to keep your child asleep at night. So it's not a separate brain area for night versus nap sleep. They're both working for night sleep. However, the homeostatic sleep drive is something that I think we can all kind of understand intuitively. It's just the buildup of sleep need over time. And so simply put, it's the longer you're awake, the sleepier you will be. And this is why babies and young children can only be awake for a small amount of time before needing a nap. And so what you can see on this plot is the homeostatic sleep drive is described on the top. And you see those little jagged bumps. That's really representing the buildup of a sleep debt, and then the payback of that sleep debt when a nap happens, and then the buildup of sleep debt again, and then the payback of that sleep debt. So across the day, a child will accumulate a higher sleep pressure. And then what you can see on the bottom part of the slide is the circadian drive for alertness. And so this is a little bit funny because I've been talking about the circadian rhythm as it relates to sleep, but what the circadian rhythm is really doing is keeping your child awake through the day in between those naps, and then allowing sleep to happen at night in that nice long consolidated bout. The circadian rhythm is not at all intuitive. And in fact, it's, I think, very tricky because, you know, the homeostatic sleep drive feels very natural. We know, okay, you know, my child needs to go down for a nap maybe in 1 or 2 hours, but the circadian rhythm doesn't quite work like that. And Jessica, if you go to the next slide, I'll illustrate how this works and why this is complicated. So every adult, baby, child has a circadian rhythm that is not set to 24 hours. So some people are early birds and have a circadian rhythm that's a little shorter than 24. Some have a circadian rhythm that's a little longer than 24, and we would consider those people night owls. And the way that we all stay aligned to the 24-hour day is through regular light exposure. So our bodies are looking for the light signal every day. Particularly the dawn signal helps to set your clock. And so light enters the eyes, hits some specialized cells in the back of the retina, transmits that signal to a place in the hypothalamus of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And then that tells your body, okay, here's a light signal. That must mean that it's time to be awake. And that sends a cascade of other signals across the body to coordinate biological function. You've probably heard of melatonin, which is a hormone that is produced in the brain as well. And so melatonin is tightly coupled to this circadian rhythm and the pathway between the suprachiasmatic nucleus and the pineal gland where melatonin is produced. So the bottom line here is that for your circadian rhythm, it depends on, you know, your optimal timing of sleep for your child will depend on when your child is exposed to light and darkness during the day, which is a little bit complicated, but we'll get into that more later.
Great. I do want to mention, so this is a picture of my son who was a horrible sleeper. This is how Huckleberry started in a way. He was the inspiration. And we went to, we went overseas and we're trying to take these family photos and he would not stay awake. I felt like for sure he's waking up all the time. It'd be no problem, but it was it was this sleep drive. He just had such a hard time staying awake at the one time we needed him to. So, and also this homeostatic sleep pressure. So Huckleberry has something called sweet spot that will help predict this tired but not overtired window for babies from 2 months and up. So it can be hard to figure that out on your own. Some babies don't show sleepy signals very well. And so this is something that has been really helpful to many families. Okay, now the next one. Is this a fact or a myth? Never wake a sleeping baby. Now you may not want to if your baby's asleep, but should you ever?
Right. Yeah, this is a myth. And I completely appreciate the sentiment behind that statement because often it takes so much work to get your child to sleep that the thought of waking your child up just feels ridiculous. However, I just told you about how the circadian rhythm works and how light resets your internal clock and how light resets your child's internal clock. And so when a baby is born, they're not adapted to the 24-hour day at all. In fact, their sleep can happen at really any time of day or night. They can have waking bouts at any time of day or night. Sleep is just sort of a big mess, and you don't really see any consolidated sleep within the first few weeks and even months. But over time, a baby will start to stabilize with the majority of their sleep happening at night and then naps happening across the day. And the reason that that happens is because your child is synchronizing to the 24-hour day through that light exposure that he or she is receiving every day. And so it's a good practice to just make sure that your child has a regular morning light exposure. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to wake your child up and then immediately go outside. But a little tip that I often offer parents who have newborns is, if you want wake time to be maybe around 7 in the long run, then around 7 o'clock every day, just open the curtains, make the sleep environment a little less conducive to sleep, let that light naturally come in, and your baby will more likely than not wake up naturally within, a few minutes to maybe a half hour or so. And if your baby is really sleeping well beyond that, then you can just gently start to stroke your child's cheek and allow a very gentle wake up to happen. And that regular light cue has been shown to accelerate the process of synchronizing to the day and having days and nights stabilize. So it's really valuable to facilitate that natural transition that happens from a circadian rhythm standpoint. And I just love this plot. And Jessica, I would love if you could just share what this is, because I think it really nicely illustrates what I've just described.
Definitely. And I wish, I had known this. I remember my son just having horrible day-night confusion at the beginning. He was born in the winter. We never went outside. The schedule was all kinds of crazy. And so I think we could have handled that better had I known that just a regular morning wake time would lead to a faster sleep consolidation. So what we have here, every now and then we like to do pretty things with customer data and give it to them. And so this is one of our users' sleep data for his child from 0 to 14 months. He actually got this printed on a pillow that he put in his nursery, which I thought was really special. And what you see here, the red is a sleep time. The beige color is awake time. And at the top here, this is the first couple months, you'll notice it's all crazy. It's all crazy. And that's the way it's going to be, unfortunately. So you're not doing anything wrong. This is how it is. However, around 2 months, then things do start to develop. And you can see 5 naps starting to emerge. And then around 4 months, you see it consolidate down to about 4 naps. Then around 5.5, 6 months, it goes down to 3 naps, and then it just keeps dropping down. And another interesting thing is that before dropping a nap, the night sleep often gets a little bit later. And then once the nap is dropped, then the night sleep lengthens. So sleep is, you'll also notice around the 6-month mark, it went all kinds of crazy between the 4 to 3 nap transition, it's a common thing. So sleep is beautiful, data is beautiful, but it is chaotic at the same time. All right, next one. Okay, so this is one that we hear a lot, which is that babies have a natural bedtime of 7 p.m. And so we get people who are trying to force a 7 p.m. bedtime. And then they say, it's taking forever for their child to fall asleep. Bedtime is really hard. Other times, maybe both parents, they work late and they feel guilty about not having a 7 p.m. bedtime, or they've tried it and just seems like their child is just not having it. So is this a fact or a myth?
Well, this one is most definitely a myth. And I think it was very nicely illustrated on the plot of Huckleberry data that you showed just a minute ago. What we had there, you could see that when that baby started to align to having consolidated sleep at night and more awake time during the day, bedtime was probably quite late, maybe even as late as 9 or 10 p.m. And a lot of us don't really think about, babies having such a late bedtime, but that is very normal. When a baby first starts to align to the 24-hour day, they'll often have a shorter night, so maybe only 9 or 10 hours, with a lot of naps happening during the day. And then over time, as naps consolidate, bedtime often does get earlier. And as you said, there are fluctuations through each developmental transition. So before nap transitions, sometimes sleep will get later again and then pull earlier. And then on top of all of that, you have circadian phase, and you also have cultural norms. And so, this is really interesting, I think, when we think about just the different cultures in Europe, for example. So a family and baby in Spain may, have a very nice sort of late typical Spanish dinner, going to bed at, maybe that child goes to bed at 9 or 10 at night, and that can work perfectly well as long as that child has the opportunity to sleep in the morning and get the enough sleep to keep them rested through the day and in good form. There's no problem with the bedtime that late. And what happens is, you have an internal clock that is sort of promoting sleep at a relatively early or late time. But if your cultural norm is to stay up late, then you're probably keeping the lights on later, which means that light in the evening shifts the drive to sleep and wake later, whereas light in the morning shifts everything earlier. And so that evening light for a Spanish family who has a later bedtime is going to help to keep that child's biological bedtime shifted later to align to that sort of that cultural norm. And then if you go to the next slide, I think that this really also nicely illustrates what parents often face when they're hearing information about what is normal and then really trying to fight biology. So the little graphic in the right corner is from a group, Monique Le-Bourgeois and her lab at the University of Colorado in Boulder here in the US. And she studied toddlers. And so you don't really need to understand what's on this plot. I'll explain it to you. Each row represents a different child. And what's plotted there is their sleep and their melatonin timing. And melatonin starts to rise about an hour before your optimal bedtime. And so in this case, what you can see is most of the children are going to bed around the same time. So sort of between 7 and 8 in the evening. But the little sort of dots that are kind of crossing the slide are the melatonin times. So while all of these children have about the same bedtime, their melatonin is being produced at very different times. And what this means from a practical standpoint is that the children who are at the top of the graph are probably having a very easy time falling asleep because their melatonin is being produced much earlier than their bedtime. And so once it's time for bed, they're wiped out, they're ready to go. But the children more at the end of the graph, on the bottom part of the graph, you can see that line just goes right up against the sleep. Those children are probably wide awake and unable to sleep because the circadian rhythm, again, is promoting wakefulness through the day. And that's to keep you and your child awake in order to maintain that alignment to the 24-hour day. So simply put, the strongest drive to be awake happens right at the end of the day before your child's bedtime. And so if you have the timing wrong, effectively, you're going to have a child who simply cannot sleep. And if you have a preschool or school-age child who is laying in bed with nothing to do, what are they going to do? They're probably going to get out of bed. They're going to come find you. They're going to tell you that they can't sleep. They're going to ask for things. They'll experiment. Some younger children will just take all their pajamas off, take off their diapers maybe. So you really want to make sure that you are thinking about when your child is capable of sleeping. And if you're trying to put your child down at 7 every day and your child never falls asleep before 8, I would say just meet your child where he or she is. Maybe go with the 8 o'clock bedtime. And again, you can shift this. It is complicated. I'm not going to go into it now, but with careful control of light and darkness, if your child's natural sleep time doesn't align with what you would really like, it is possible to adjust.
Great. So I think a key couple of takeaways is that there are individual differences. So I'm able to peek at some of the Q&As coming in, but we'll answer them later at the end, but one was like, how is it possible that they might, like, one kid could be this way and another kid be another way? And there are some biological differences. And also there are cultural differences, but whether it, you go to bed at 7 versus 9, the key is that there's still enough sleep overall in the 24-hour period. So one little anecdote, I wonder if we have anyone listening in from Romania. We had a lot of users from Romania, which is awesome. And what we did notice at the beginning before we introduced Sweet Spot was that bedtime was often later than compared to the UK, for example. And I'm going to guess that it's people want to stay out late, which is fine unless you're not making up for the sleep elsewhere, which was sometimes happening. And so then with Sweet Spot, a lot of they're getting an hour more sleep. So as long as you're still making up for that sleep somewhere, and also within reason too. So we've also had some families who the parents are night owls. They really want to try to maintain a midnight bedtime for their child, which is kind of like putting your child on the night shift. It's like, it's not impossible, but it's just going to be hard to do.
Yeah, and I would just add to that the photo period, if you don't do anything, if you're generally, I mean, most children will probably go to bed somewhere between, probably 6 and 9 p.m. I would say, just in order to get enough sleep to maintain a regular wake time that allows for a full sleep opportunity, and relative to exposure to light and darkness. And so if you are not living in Scandinavia where you have really extreme photo periods, the sun will do the work for you of keeping your child adapted to night being night and day being day. It's only in those more extreme cases, like trying to keep a midnight bedtime, where you can do it, but it would be really hard to do, that you have to really control that light and dark exposure.
Yeah, it's going to be a fight. All right. Next, fact or myth. All right. And I want you to think about what you think the answer to this might be before we answer. So you've probably heard it and you might have thought it yourself. Many people have said this to me. Have your child sleep with noise and light so they don't get used to only sleeping in a dark and quiet place. So certainly people have said for themselves, I always had lots of noise and never made it dark for my child, and now my child can sleep anywhere. Whereas I know for my child, I have 3 now, but it was the first one who gave me the most trouble. Where like we got to the point where it's like you'd only sleep if it was pitch black, white noise, no interruptions, and I wondered if it was that's how it was going to have to be forever and ever. All right. So what do you think?
So this is a myth. It would be nice if it were true, but unfortunately, humans do sleep better in a sleep environment that is cool, that is dark, that is quiet. And so is it possible to sleep in a noisy environment? Of course, but as I described earlier, it's going to change the depth of your child's sleep. And so, you certainly can have your child sleep outside, sleep with a lot of noise going on, but that's probably going to mean that your child isn't going to have as much deep sleep. And so my recommendation is always that you try to maintain the best sleep environment that you can, because what that's going to do is allow your child to sort of have a rested baseline. And then, we live in the real world. You don't live in a bubble. I know that. You're not going to be able to achieve this perfect sleep environment every single time that your child has a rest. You're going to go on vacation. You're going to, be out and your child's going to fall asleep in the car. And that happens. That is completely okay. But if your child is generally rested, then that will confer better resilience to those situations when your child is sleeping in a less than optimal environment. And then I just want to add, like darkness is not just an environmental thing. Darkness, it has light has a direct biological effect. And so if you really want your child to be sleeping at night, you really should ensure that your child is in a nice dark environment, because again, the second that you turn on the light, that light signal is going to go down that, into your eyes, into the brain, and it's going to tell your child that it's time to be awake. And that's going to be more likely to cause awakening the next day. I will also note, though, that, during naps, it's not so much about the circadian rhythm. So light during the middle of the day isn't doing as much from a circadian rhythm standpoint. And so it is okay, to have a little more light going on during the day, but you may still find that your child is able to take longer naps with a darker and more optimal sleep environment when you can achieve that.
Great. And I think that actually answered one of the questions I saw come through about sunlight during the day. Is that going to make it hard to nap? So that's, if it's during the nap, then yeah, but not if it's before the nap.
Yes.
That's great. So so your baby might be sleeping through when it's chaotic and everything, but it might not be as deep sleep. And the other thing is that I think because people think that it is setting your child up to always require, to be like a really sensitive sleeper, that they're hesitant to put up shades on the windows, but yet are having issues with their child falling asleep for naps. So it's like you might as well try it. It's like the easiest thing to do versus try to do sleep training or anything else. So you can always take them down, right?
Absolutely.
If the shades don't work.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to point out here was once kids, like toddlers and preschoolers, even if at home it's like they'll only sleep with complete darkness, total silence or white noise, at daycare or at school, that peer pressure really helps to get to sleep. So Erin, you had mentioned there's that peer modeling happening. So I know for my son, I was so concerned, but it was no problem for him to sleep at school. Okay, next one, fact or myth. Your child will sleep when he's tired. So you may have heard this from well-meaning people, to just like, don't worry, they'll sleep when they're tired. Don't worry about it. So is this true or not true?
Yeah, this one is, it depends. And it depends on a lot of factors, but the bottom line is that falling asleep is a learned behavior. So what do we need to do to fall asleep? We need to close our eyes, we need to relax our bodies, and we need to, slow our breathing. And that's what babies, toddlers, and school-age children need to do too. But often a child will, especially a baby, will only do that if certain sleep associations are present. And so you may wonder, well, what is a sleep association? And here I'm talking about the experiences that you expect to fall asleep. So less about the sleep environment that we just talked about, and in this case, more about sort of the immediate close experience of falling asleep. So as adults, we have sleep associations. We associate our bed, our pillows, our pajamas as our sleep environment. And so if you fall asleep on your couch watching a movie, you're very unlikely to spend the whole night there, because what will happen is when you hit a natural waking in between your sleep cycles, you're going to wake up, you're going to realize that you're on your couch. That's not the place that you identify with sleep. And then you're going to get yourself into your bed. And so, and that, that's really just because that's not the place that you identify with sleep. But if you think about it, there's nothing wrong with sleeping on your couch. It's probably reasonably comfortable. It's safe. It's probably not a terrible sleep environment, but it's just not the place you define as the right place to sleep. And so often babies will become very accustomed to falling asleep, say with a pacifier. And then when the pacifier falls out, they'll hit the end of a sleep cycle where there's a brief wake up, realize the pacifier is missing, and then call out for their parents to replace it or to help them find it. And often sleep associations just form very naturally. There's absolutely nothing wrong with holding a baby to sleep or feeding a baby to sleep. It's only if that child then starts to develop a dependence on those specific experiences as their mechanism to fall asleep that you run into trouble. And so when people say your baby will sleep when he's tired, that can be really challenging because basically, you may find that in the absence of those cues that your child is expecting to have to go to sleep, that it takes a very, very long time for your child to go to sleep, maybe well beyond what would be the optimal sleep timing. And so you really need to have a very sort of thoughtful approach to figuring out how to change your child's sleep experience. If you think that what you're doing is, not helping the experience that your child is having, or if it feels like it's maybe even causing some sleep disruption. But the bottom line is really, you just want to think about what norms are for your child's age, and then try to guide your child into those norms for sleep timing. And then if you have something like a sleep association that's inhibiting your child's ability to sleep, then there are a lot of different ways you can work on teaching your child new sleep habits and teaching your child independent sleep.
Great. And to clarify one quick point, when she said the couch is a comfortable, safe place, that was in the realm of adults. So
yeah,
not for
adults,
babies,
not for babies, for
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Wonderful. Okay. Next one. Okay. So this is a common one. For better sleep, feed your baby rice cereal before bed. Okay, so I have a little story about this, but I'm going to let you say what science shows first.
Yeah, so I guess we can classify this as it depends, but not specific to rice cereal. So there was a study that showed that there was no improvement overall among babies who were given rice cereal in a bottle. Their sleep just didn't get better. However, having a long consolidated bout of sleep requires a pretty long fast. And so a child will need to have sufficient daytime calorie intake to support that overnight fast. And so if your child is, maybe very distracted during the day, then setting up, just a routine where you go into a distraction-free environment during feedings in order to help just, maximize the feedings that your child's having, avoid, just like popping off and looking around and, maybe taking just enough milk or formula to take the edge off and then sort of refusing the rest of a bottle or rest of the feeding. That's not going to help an overnight, fasting stretch. So, just, that would be something that I would recommend you just take a close look at how your child is eating during the day, whether or not feels like your child's getting sufficient quantity to make it through the night, and then consider, what is happening overnight. Now, if your child has a sleep association with feeding, that is, I'll just use a bottle example. If you have, say, a 9-month-old who is waking every hour to hour and a half and having like ½ ounce or an ounce of a bottle and falling back asleep, that's more of a sleep association type of an issue. And so even if you work to increase your child's calorie intake overnight, that's probably not going to change anything, because if that bottle is inducing those sleep behaviors for your child, if that bottle is helping your child relax and close his eyes and slow his breathing, then having more calories during the day is not going to prevent the waking from happening. Waking is a normal part of sleep. And so, a child will look for the replication of that experience that they associate with sleep to go back to sleep during the day. So if you have a sleep association issue hanging on, you want to think about that and think about how to foster that independent sleep, and then consider the calorie intake during the day.
Right. Yeah, and something I want to highlight, which was waking through the night is a normal part of sleep. Adults do it, you just might not remember it. It's whether they then need your help to fall back asleep, and and they're at an age, old enough, and you don't particularly want to continue doing that. If you're fine doing it, then go ahead. no one says you can't. So we had a family who had already gotten to the point of, working on how the child fell asleep and was generally a good sleeper, but was still waking up at night. And so for this particular case, hunger was the issue. And so when they kind of logged how much they fed, and then you could see when the child woke up or if, and also when in the morning. And it was a very, very beautiful correlation. The more the child ate before bed, the less likely this child was to not wake up at night. However, for many other families, the main drive for the waking is not hunger. It's actually, they just associate the act of falling asleep with a bottle or whatever it is. And so in that case, increasing calories during the day isn't going to make a difference. Okay, sleep before midnight is the best quality sleep. I know this one. This one is one of Erin's pet peeves, so I'm gonna let her talk about this.
Yes, thank you. So this one does drive me crazy. So I'm going to give you just a 10-second primer on just what is happening during sleep overnight. So there's REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. You've probably heard of that. That's when intense dreaming happens. There's non-REM sleep, which is not a very clever name, but non-REM sleep is made up of substages. Deep sleep, which is stage 3 or 4, stage 2, which is lighter sleep. And all of these stages of sleep are present through the entire night. So that, sleep cycles between REM and non-REM. And there is a little bit more deep sleep at the beginning of the night because that represents the dissipation of sleep pressure. So remember, your child built up sleep pressure during the day. Deep sleep is just, kind of that payback of sleep debt that accrued through the day. And then, at the end of the night, there's more REM sleep, but it's all relative. That, again, sleep, all of these stages are happening at all times, and no one stage of sleep is better than another. And here, I think we sort of know, we've heard of deep sleep, we've heard of REM sleep. We know those are probably important, but stage 2 never gets any attention. And there's these features called sleep spindles, and they really dominate stage 2 sleep. They're fast frequency bursts of activity, and sleep spindles are associated with a whole range of positive cognitive function. And one cool study found that 3-month-olds after a nap with high spindle density were better able to recognize faces that they had previously seen than babies who didn't nap. And so what you need to know here is not just like, how do I get my baby to have more sleep spindles? You don't need to worry about that. You just need to have your child sleep at appropriate times across the day, get enough sleep, and the sleep will do its work. But there's no throwaway sleep. That's really the bottom line. All sleep is important.
All sleep is important. Wonderful. Okay, here's the next one. Keep your child up so she'll sleep longer at night. So we do personalized sleep plans for people, and people will say kind of what they've tried before. And I've seen it where somebody said their pediatrician told them to keep their baby, who was a young baby, up 3 hours before bedtime so she'll sleep longer at night. And unfortunately, this baby was not sleeping longer at night, and probably that 3-hour window is not doing any good. Okay, so Erin.
Yeah, so the answer here is actually, it depends. So we have a couple of slides here to answer this. But firstly, sleep deprivation is not a good thing for newborns at all. There is no reason that you should try to keep 1, 2, or 3-month-old baby up for an extended period of time. And in fact, there are several studies that show that it increases the prevalence of apneas, which are just pauses in breathing. And so that's very scary and dangerous. But in addition to that, trying to keep your child up could in fact backfire, because when you have an apnea, ideally you are waking up in response to that apnea, and the same would be true for your baby. And so you may actually find that your child wakes up more with longer stretch of awake time, more sleep deprivation. So my recommendation would be that you're not trying to force your child, certainly not your newborn, to stay awake for long stretches at a time at all. But if you shift to the next slide, there are sometimes cases where shifting sleep or extending awake time can be helpful. So one example would be if you have a child who is normally going to bed at, say, 7 p.m. and waking up at 5:30 in the morning, getting 10 and a half hours of sleep, and your child is, say, 15 months old, that actually could be enough sleep for your child. And so if you want to get a later wake time, you will need to keep your child up awake later in the evening. But that in itself is not going to solve anything. That'll just sleep deprive your child unless you expose your child to bright light in the evening. So again, I don't have time to get into the mechanics of how the circadian rhythm will do that shifting. But just keep in mind it's somewhat complicated. So you can shift later, but you need to control light and darkness is really the takeaway.
Right. Yes. If you post on a Facebook forum, like some group, and you ask them, my child is waking up early in the morning. What should I do? You will probably get some people saying, put him to bed earlier. Some people saying, put him to bed later. And the reason why is because it really depends on the situation. So certainly, like we've worked with a family, we actually had them go to bed an hour and a half earlier than what they were doing. And that increased overall sleep and actually slept in later. In another case, it was very much about shifting bedtime later. But to Erin's point, it needs to be combined, like the right kind of shifting later with bright light and managing the light exposure in the morning as well. Okay. All right, so now we're going to do this lightning round. And these are going to be quicker answers. You might not get into as much of the detail. And then after that, we're going to have Q&A. All right, so first one. Does poor sleep affect cognitive performance in children?
Yes, it does. But this is not something to stress out about. So just think about yourself. If you haven't been sleeping very well and then you go to work, you're probably not performing at your best, right? And so the same would be true for your child. And so if you feel that your child is showing signs of insufficient sleep, it's worth trying to work on that and extend your child's sleep. But you do not need to worry about a one-off day here or there. And then I just want to add, I described that study about facial recognition and sleep spindles. The average nap time for those 3-month-olds was 45 minutes. So that's not, a long nap. So you don't generally have to worry, if your child just doesn't have a great day. That's not going to be the end of the world. Just think about over the course of a week, is your child getting enough sleep? And if the answer is yes, probably don't have to worry so much about cognitive performance deficits. If the answer is no, then it's probably worth working on sleep.
Great. Does poor sleep lead to lower IQ?
There's no evidence that I know of that would support this. And in fact, the only study that I know of that even relates IQ to sleep found no differences in children with different sleep durations. So this is not really something that you should need to worry about.
A little personal anecdote. I had read in a book that he made up some chart about better sleep and how smart the children were. And my son was waking up every 2 to 3 hours for a long time. I was like, oh, he is doomed to be really dumb then. I think the good thing, he was getting overall enough sleep. It was just very broken up at night, particularly. Okay. What's the best sleep training method? If you do sleep training at all.
No. Yeah, I'm kidding. So there is not a best sleep training method. So, the short answer here is the American Academy of Sleep Medicine in the US commissioned a meta-analysis several years ago that looked at all different types of sleep training methods and found that there was no evidence to support that one method was superior to another. There are studies that show at different developmental, sort of phases, some methods do work a little bit better for children in those phases, but really overall, there's no single best method at all. But I also want to know, sleep training is not something that everyone has to do. And so if you are happy with your sleep situation, let's just say you rock your child to sleep, you put your child down, and then maybe get up a couple of times during the night to rock your child back to sleep. I wouldn't really define that as a problem. If you're both rested, if you feel good, you don't really have to just do sleep training because that's, what you read that other people do. It really comes down to, do you have a problem? And then even if you feel you do have a problem, you can work on sleep in a more incremental manner, just trying to teach your baby or toddler skills, at a very measured and paced rate.
Great. And how can I tell if my child is getting enough sleep or not enough sleep?
Yeah, this is such a great question, because I think we all are faced with these numbers, for what sleep duration should be that are really unattainable for many children. So for example, a lot of parents of young babies think that 12 hours is average. 12 hours is not average. 12 hours is long normal. So will some babies do that? Yes, but not every baby, no way. And so you may then question, okay, if my child's only getting 10 and a half, 11 hours overnight, is that enough? And what I would say is, don't worry about your child yawning when she wakes up. There is a grogginess that happens when we wake up that's called sleep inertia. And until that, it's just the process of waking up. You probably sometimes yawn when you wake up. But once your child is out of that sleep inertia phase, if you're seeing yawns and eye rubbing, if your child always falls asleep between sleep episodes, say in a car, or when you're out for a walk at a non-nap time, for example, then those are indicators that your child probably needs a little more sleep. On the other hand, with toddlers, emotion regulation is a huge problem. So once you get to the end of the day, like 4 or 5 in the afternoon, toddlers who aren't getting enough sleep will have more tantrums, will throw toys, will be much less likely to ask an adult for help. So those can be cues too. And then for school-age children, just inattentiveness, fidgetiness, and there's something called social jet lag, where when adults or children sleep later on weekends and have to be woken up for school, there's a mismatch in sleep obtained and sleep opportunity, and we that creates a little circadian misalignment and can lead to insufficient sleep. And so often just working to, if you observe that your child is doing that, working to get an earlier bedtime on school days so that your child can achieve a full night of sleep will help improve attention and will reduce some of those fidgety behaviors that you often see in school-age children.
That is so great. So if you're seeing behaviors like fidgetiness, inattentiveness in school-age children or in the toddler phase, lots of tantrums, of course, some of that is normal, but it's always a good idea to see, are they getting enough sleep? Especially, I think for school-age children, it's easy to miss 15 minutes at bedtime, 15 minutes in the morning, but then that adds up to 30 minutes deficit every day. So it can accumulate and really result in these behaviors that we discussed. All right, last one. What is the best age to start working on sleep?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Really, as soon as you come home from the hospital, and I do not mean sleep training. What I mean is just thinking about sleep, thinking about when your child might need to sleep, thinking about where that sleep pressure might be, starting to get into the habit of opening those curtains every morning, and then maybe giving your child a chance to fall asleep in a bassinet, maybe just one time a day. Maybe that's your goal, and you put your child down in a bassinet and rub your baby's cheek until she falls asleep. And maybe sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and that's totally okay. So you can really start the foundation for healthy sleep very early on. It's really never too early to start working on good sleep habits.
Wonderful. Okay, so we are opening it up for questions. I also wanted to, for the people who made it to the end of this presentation, you get a special thing. You can use this code Sleep Week for 20% off at the website. All right, so Sarah, I believe you are going to be feeding us some questions.
Yes, we've got a lot of questions, so we're not going to have a huge amount of time to get through all of them. So I just want to let everybody know that we will be following some of these up through different mechanisms, making sure that we try and answer as many as possible. But I've collapsed a few together to kind of make it a bit easier. So if your question isn't verbatim, please forgive us. So one of the big questions that came through a lot when you were talking about circadian rhythm and light and things like that, we have some people that have asked questions really regarding kind of light pollution. Some of those things, not necessarily pollution, but like use of night lights and things like artificial light and things like that. Could you talk a little bit about what evidence there is around those and whether like night lights are a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you guys asked this question. So there are a couple of points to make. So one is just to illustrate what light does. Again, I don't want to overstate what melatonin does, but just to give you an illustration, when we bring people into the lab and they're producing melatonin and we're measuring it, and we turn on a light, the body instantly stops producing melatonin, instantly. And there have been studies, again, going back to that researcher I mentioned earlier at the University of Colorado, Boulder, who have found that children are much more sensitive to light than adults. So like the equivalent of 5 candles burning in a room will affect a child's circadian rhythm, but it won't really affect an adult. So when it comes to night lights, if you need one for safety, make it as dim as possible, and then ideally in the red spectrum. So red light can affect the circadian rhythm if it's really bright, but our bodies are most sensitive to blue wavelength light. So you want to stay away from blues and greens and whites and lean towards reds and super, super dim.
Okay, so we've got a lot of kind of questions also about age and the changes across age. So things that develop from sort of infanthood into the kind of toddler years and then on. Could you speak a little as to the kind of developmental stages? And some people have kind of talked about sleep patterns and that you've noticed and how they change. And is there kind of a core point or core milestones that people want to know about?
Yeah, so I would say just kind of rapid fire, about the 6-month mark, we're looking at about 3 naps a day and a night of, 10 to 12 hours. At about the 9-month mark, we're dropping down to about 2 naps. Nighttime stays about the same, maybe gets a little longer, so 10 and a half to 12 perhaps. At about the 15-month mark, most children will go down to 1 nap. Again, there's a range around this. Not every child is a robot. And then we generally, there's a lot of good evidence to support that napping is incredibly important past age 3. And so, if you have a 2-year-old who's resisting naps, it's really worth trying to maintain that nap. And then children drop the nap, the single nap between age 3 and age 6. So socially, there aren't a lot of 6-year-olds napping anymore, but it is totally normal for some 6-year-olds to continue to nap.
Okay, and then another question we had, which there was some questions about different kind of feeding methods and bottle versus breast, which I'm just going to leave to one side and kind of frame a different way. A lot of people have been asking about that kind of pre-sleep feed. I had a child with a medical condition, so we had special formulas and things like that. Could you speak a little to kind of the diversity there? And some of your thoughts on the absolute not to do's and some of the good advice points.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to, breastfeeding versus bottle feeding, I'm sure people asked if one is better for sleep or not. There's no evidence to support, there are mixed studies, but the quality of the studies varies widely. And so, based on the bulk of the literature, there's no consensus that, formula is better. We would say there are so many benefits to breastfeeding that if that's working for you, there is no reason to switch to formula for better sleep. It may not even help at all. Based on the evidence we have, probably not. And then when it comes to, just your bedtime routine, feeding to sleep, again, it really comes down to, is there a problem or not? Do you perceive a problem? If you're feeding your child's falling asleep on a bottle or breast, and you don't feel like you have a sleep problem persisting, I wouldn't worry that much about it. But if your child is having a bottle, and as I mentioned earlier, waking up, maybe every hour, just to have a little bit of milk, just to get back to sleep, that is more a sleep association type issue. And a best practice would be just try to start to move that bottle a little bit earlier in the routine. So maybe make half the bottle before, say, a bath, and then do the last part of the bottle before the routine to try to start to be able to put your child down in a more awake state, but while also ensuring, you don't want to take away the bottle and then have your child go to bed hungry. But just trying to move the timing of that bottle a little bit, or that breastfeeding, depending on what you're doing, is very helpful.
And so we got a load of questions there, and I realize I apologize to people. I'm not going to get to all of them, but we will kind of follow up where appropriate later on. But there's some really interesting questions coming through about things like night terrors. And why do they happen? How do you manage them? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, so night terrors are a tricky one. So night terrors happen in deep sleep. There's not a whole lot of research on night terrors because they're not harmful. There's not a lot of research spending that is being done to investigate night terrors. We know that there are probably some genetic components based on the studies that have been done. And we also know that sleep loss can be a trigger for having night terrors. So if your child is having a lot of night terrors, you may want to try to maybe move bedtime a little earlier, try to increase your child's overall sleep duration to see if that helps. But night terrors are not, while they are incredibly stressful on you as a parent. I have a child who has a history of night terrors. They're not really harmful as long as your child isn't like getting out of bed and walking around and bumping into things. So the general advice is just supervise your child. Don't wake them up and ask what's going on, because that can cause more stress around sleep. Just make sure your child stays safe. And then once the night terror is over, let them go back to sleep. They probably won't even remember that it happened in the morning.
And so one of the follow-up questions, sorry, Jessica?
Oh, just wanted to add, in some cases, just examining how much overall sleep your child is getting or how long they've been awake can help as well. Not always, but in some cases, overtiredness does make it increase. I know we've seen it where it's like, if it was the last wake period is more than a certain amount of time, there was a night terror. If it was shorter, then there wasn't one. Again, not for every case, but generally it's something to try because it's easy to do.
And so one of the questions that kind of pertains to what you just said there, Jessica, was about sleep debt and catching up on sleep and trying to remedy these issues. Could you speak a little bit more to that?
I'll add one thing, and then Erin, please chime in. It's totally normal for day to day there to be some variation. Generally, it evens out over the week. So if you have one day where it's like, oh no, it was all off, and then they'll probably make up for it later in the week. So don't worry if every day is a little different. And then Erin?
Yeah, and I would just add, it depends on the age of a child, but a baby may do better making up for lost sleep during the day, maybe in an extended nap. And maybe that's a situation where you do something you wouldn't normally do, like maybe hold your baby to get a longer nap, just to get that catch-up sleep. For babies, it's really helpful to use naps in that way because again, you want to try to maintain a rough schedule at night to maintain circadian alignment. It's not a fixed rule. So I don't want anybody to go away thinking they have to have a rigid bed and wake time. But, the more you can protect bed and wake time, the better. And then sometimes having an early bedtime is actually helpful for young children, rather than trying to expect them to sleep late. Some children will, but it's more common that a child will be able to pay back some sleep debt going to bed early as opposed to sleeping in late. So that's a little tip I would offer.
So one of the other questions about tips you could offer is white noise and those kind of noise machines and technologies like useful, or are they kind of a distraction to try and get kids off sleeping longer?
Yes, such a great question. So we generally don't recommend white noise to induce sleep. I know there are some products out there that are, trying to do that. There's not a whole lot of research around their effectiveness. What we do recommend, though, and this comes also from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and the European Sleep Research Society, is using white noise to protect sleep. So if you live in a noisy urban environment, you have, say, street-facing windows and your child is hearing cars going by intermittently at night, that's not the type of noise that one can adapt to. That's not like a typical household noise, especially if it's intermittent or erratic. And so placing a white noise machine between, your child's bed and the window where the noise is coming from is a good way to go. But of course, you don't want that white noise to be so loud that it's obtrusive or stressful. There is a problem if the white noise is too loud. So you want to really just use it strategically to mask those sounds that would otherwise wake your child.
Okay, and we've got some final questions that have gone a little bit more towards the things we do at Cambridge. So things about what kind of role do genetics have in sleep length and how many naps and nap time children have?
Yeah, such a good question. So there aren't a lot of really good studies looking at like early childhood development and genetics and sleep. There are certainly studies in adults that show that there are differences that have genetic origins. So there are polymorphisms. That one is called, PER3 or period 3 is a polymorphism that we know affects sleep. And there are circadian genes that, turn on and off that can confer longer or shorter sleep or morningness, eveningness preference. At this point, we presume that there, would be an effect on children because we know, how heritable traits work. But we don't really, the science is lagging behind there. We don't know precisely, whether there are specific polymorphisms that are conferring some children to have much shorter sleep than average or much longer sleep than average. I would say the best way to try to figure that out from a parenting perspective is, again, just kind of going back to some of the things that we talked about earlier. Does it feel like your child is rested through the day? Is your child getting from one sleep episode to the next in good form? Even if that's on less sleep than maybe other children are doing, it may be okay. And certainly partner with your pediatrician to address any sleep deficiency that you think might be happening.
We're getting a lot of questions, I'm just going to say, about like normal sleep and about people's particular children. We're not going to get to those today. So I'm just going to flag to you all that there was a talk yesterday as well that the Intellectual Forum ran with a sleep specialist here as well, an anthropologist who looks specifically at a data approach to looking at like what is normal sleep and kind of dispensed with this notion that there is normal. So if you want to follow up on that talk, we will have it on our YouTube along with this video at another point. I am going to bypass some of those questions around that and prior to sleep and things like that are a little bit difficult for us to address right now. But I am going to ask you some of the ones that are coming up about different technological interventions, because of course, Huckleberry as an app is kind of a technology, but people are really interested in these kind of things that are coming out that you can buy for your child to encourage sleep. So particular kind of high-tech bassinets, people who are discussing, like there's some people here talking about like oil diffusers and humidifiers with a tech face. Like, what evidence is there for those? Are they safe? Are some of the questions that are coming through, and do they work? Are they worth the money?
Well, I'll say I love Huckleberry. And I'm not just saying that because Jessica's here. I think Huckleberry is a great tool. Because it's not trying to induce a child to sleep. It's not like some of the gadgets that you like put on your child or put your child in to try to encourage sleep. It's just, it's like having an informed, like experienced parent at your side telling you when the best time for your child to sleep might be. And I think that that's really helpful because, as you were saying with sleep norms, it's really hard to sort of know, okay, wait, I keep saying, well, just make sure your child's rested. Well, I understand, like people are probably saying, what does that mean? And an app like Huckleberry can do hand holding to help you get through that. But I will add, there is zero evidence that any of the other sleep tech gadgets work. And that's not because that they don't or they're bad. It's because, tech is getting ahead of science here. And so, we have We have bassinets that parents swear by for their newborns, but what we really need to do is consider what is called the counterfactual. So if the same child was sleeping in a different situation, would their sleep be the same or would it be different? We don't know. There are no studies to tell us that right now. And then similarly, I would be wary of anything that hasn't really, anything that could be considered unsafe that hasn't been vetted yet. So, the bassinets are generally pretty safe. But when you're talking about having like white noise right next to your child's head, that would be concerning because that, could eventually potentially cause hearing damage. So just be, careful in the products that you select and know that there's not some agency out there that's just vetting these sleep products to say that, they're doing what they claim to be doing.
Okay, and so we've had a few questions finally, just kind of the last few questions. We're going to wrap up in a minute, folks. We won't get to all of them, but there's a lot of questions here about what we can actually do to evolve routine. So people wanted you to clarify what the difference is in some of the terms you've used between sleep training and sleep association, and then other people have asked, like, what are these kind of like wake windows and things like that? Not everyone is familiar with Huckleberry here. We have some newbies, so just wondered if Jessica could quickly talk to some of the like terms you've been using from your particular platform, and then Erin might talk about a little bit of the science behind that.
Sure. Real quick, a wake window is just the time between two sleep sessions. So it might be 2 hours between when your child wakes up to when their first nap might be. It depends very much on age. It depends on how many naps they're taking, and also individual differences. Sleep association is what you associate with falling asleep. For an adult, it's you associate falling asleep with your bed and your pillows. When you lie down, you will fall asleep. And so for a baby, they might associate falling asleep with being fed to sleep or the pacifier. So if they don't have it and they wake up naturally in the middle of the night, then they will want that same thing to help them fall back asleep, which means it's great to include feeding as part of the bedtime routine. But if they associate that with falling asleep, then you might want to just kind of get them to associate sleep with other things instead. And then you also asked about sleep training. So sleep training as a term has kind of gone beyond what it really should mean. It doesn't mean letting your baby cry it out. It's just we like to use the term, improving sleep instead of sleep training, just because that term has become so loaded.
And so, Erin, is there science behind some of these notions? I mean, you've clearly explained the concept of those wake windows through talking about rhythms and such. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, so there's a lot of literature that is sort of describing how sleep evolves, how this homeostatic process, that sleep pressure drive evolves, and how it leads to changing nap patterns throughout the early part of the lifespan. Similarly, some of what I had a couple of references on one of the slides describing how the circadian rhythm begins to stabilize night at night and day during the day. And, there have been several additional studies to that. And then, even, going a little bit further, there have been numerous studies on different sleep training techniques. And so, as Jessica said, sleep training isn't just one thing, and it isn't maybe as terrible as it sounds. It could be as simple as just putting your child down awake and letting your child spend a few, minutes to try to fall asleep. And then if it doesn't work, saying, okay, it didn't work today, we'll try again tomorrow. And so there is a lot of literature looking at how different techniques work for babies in different developmental stages. And I'll just give you one quick example. Actually a couple of studies, but one in particular found that being in the room with a child who is experiencing separation anxiety works a little better than trying to sort of come and go and do check-ins, which is a very popular sleep training approach. So you want to be sensitive to where your child is in that trajectory of development, and use what you can from the scientific literature to try to guide that. And I know it's really hard to navigate because we are constantly just flooded with sound bites about sleep. And, as Jessica said at the beginning, a sound bite may be true in one situation and not in another. And so one of the things that we really try to do with my group, Baby Sleep Science, is we write blogs that are referenced. So at the end, if you want to learn more, you're going to be able to go into this. If you're a science-minded parent, you can go into the literature and see why we're recommending the things that we are. And I would just encourage parents to, ask people if they're getting information from somebody who is, saying they're an expert, just, ask, okay, well, what are the references? What is the support really here? Because I think there's been a lot of practice-based and cultural-based recommendations that have evolved among, sort of the young child sleep community, and it can be just can make your head spin.
And so I just want to put one more question to you when we're wrapping up, because we've had a couple of questions. We've got a highly international audience. Many of us have been in lockdown, but have great hopes to once again be able to visit. We hope you'll be able to visit us here in Cambridge. But the question was, how do we deal with travel? I can say to you, I've had to travel from the UK to Australia before with a little human. Do you have any advice on that? And people are asking about not just the travel, but also if you're going somewhere where they have those extended light sessions, where you're going to somewhere in Northern Europe, for example, or really far north to visit family and you have extended light. So 2 pieces of advice there for travel, and what if you're traveling somewhere that's light for long periods?
Well, I feel like that I can give a personal example here. 2 years ago, I took my children to Iceland in July. And it was light all the time. And so the first thing that we did when we arrived is we went to the grocery store and we got tin foil and we put it all over the windows in our Airbnb, because when you have effectively, near 24 hours of light, you need to create a photo period for your child to be able to sleep at night and be awake during the day. And so that worked really, really well for us. You don't have to use the tinfoil trick, but I think that it can be very helpful. I use it often, even when I'm not in Iceland or another Scandinavian country. And then, just rapid fire tips, if you have a very young child, a baby or a toddler, and you have like a little travel crib, it's really helpful if you get your child habituated to that at home. So they start to identify that travel crib space as their sleep space. And then if you can take it with you on your trips, then the cool thing is your child really has 2 sleep spaces, their home sleep space and their away sleep space. Does that mean you can't, rent a crib or something in another place? No, but it is really helpful if you can make that work. And then jet lag, you could probably tell a lot of these questions, I could talk all day on one topic. Jet lag is one of them. It's too complicated to describe, everything that you would possibly do to help your child adjust, but I would offer just a couple quick tips that will work for most people, I think. Firstly, in advance of your trip, think about the direction you're going and what time it is in the new time zone. So for example, if you're going from the US to Europe, you're going to have a situation where your child's probably going to be ready for bed at midnight or later. If you're coming from the East Coast of the US to Europe. On the flip side, if you're coming from Europe to the US, child's going to be ready for bed at like 2 p.m. or maybe 3. So you want to just be sensitive to that. And if you can do a little bit of priming, so again, maybe before you come from Europe to the US, you're just starting to trend towards later bedtimes, so that when you get to the US, you don't have to make this big jump in your child's shift. And then the second thing would be when you get to your destination, I would just wear my watch and keep it on local time and think about what time it is for my child, and then try to adapt relative to that rather than trying to immediately adapt to local time. And then finally, light exposure during the waking day is important, but when you talk about jet lag, it does get complicated, especially if we're talking about going, say, from the UK to Australia. It's not just going to be a matter of just get light during the day. And I won't go into all of the ins and outs of that. But I would say it probably won't hurt, but ideally, you're really doing the priming and thinking about where your child's internal clock is before you're taking that trip, and then trying to protect your child's exposure to light and darkness once you get to your destination.
Okay.
There's a great blog also on baby sleep science that goes into what you might want to do for each of those. And I'll add one more thing on that. When out of lockdown, you get to travel, just enjoy it. Don't try to be a slave to your child's sleep schedule and stay in your Airbnb the whole time. Just enjoy it, get out, and then try to have a few days here and there to get some good naps in.
Yes, and if sleep goes crazy in travel, you can recover when you get home. It's okay.
Yeah. So out of all of this, it's like sleep is extremely important, but don't let it stress you out. Don't feel guilty. There is help available, and you're going to be okay with the right guidance.
Thank you so much for joining us today, ladies. It's been so helpful, and we've covered so much ground. I know we have got nowhere near the surface of the questions that have been asked, so we will be following up. We also have recorded today, so for those of you who ducked in late or ducked out early, you can join us. It will be on YouTube, and we will email it out along with a survey about how much you've enjoyed, hopefully this evening, and any further follow-up can be put into that survey as well. So thank you so much to Jessica and Erin for tonight. We've really appreciated you being able to answer such a diverse set of questions with so much evidence and so much information. Thank you once again.